I went no contact with my narcissistic mother over a tea kettle. She tried to ruin my life again, so I ruined hers. I'm 42. To say that I tried for too long is an understatement. I tried the hands-off approach for my 30s, and most of the time it worked. However, as I've been learning about my codependency and trying to heal from the trauma that woman has wrought across my life, I've been much more upfront on calling her out on her bullcrap. I was patient. I wouldn't back down anymore, and I'd often find myself feeling absolute pleasure at seeing her flying off in a narcissistic rage over me being able to beat her at her own game. Fun for a while, right? But I realized these talks and texts we had were coming at a price to my mental well-being. Sometimes, I admit, she'd get me. As a mom, she knew what buttons she could push to really get a rise out of me. I was trying to work on myself and started debating if no contact would be the best choice. That's when it happened. The thing that sent me over the edge was an old tea kettle. Backstory: I moved back to my hometown after my grandmother's health was starting to go downhill to take care of her. As she was a former nursing home CNA, I always promised my nanny I wouldn't ever let her waste away in one of those facilities. But with the move came drawbacks. My once flourishing career was gone, and I was starting over at a smaller facility with much less money. In my mind, it was more than worth the price of being able to take care of my grandmother. However, I would have to move in with my grandmother in her home. And as I've said, my mother is a narc. I wasn't crazy about this idea as I knew my grandmother only had a lifetime estate on the property. My mother would inherit, and I knew it would be hell. Before that though, I got 4 more amazing years with the woman who actually loved me and supported me even through all the pain my mother inflicted upon me. Cue to when my grandmother finally passed. My mom sweeps into the home and starts to lay down rules on what I needed to do to stay in her home. Keep in mind, I had done all the upkeep to the house for the last 4 years. I paid for everything and never asked her for one dime of money. I know there's always a price when you ask that woman for help. So instead of bowing down and paying her rent to live in the house she wasn't even going to use, I made plans. I informed her knew that won't be happening and let her know of my plans to move. To say she tried every which way she could to prevent my moving is an understatement. From trying to drum up new things I owed her money for to dangling the carrot of signing the house into my name to letting other family members know if they helped me move, she'd never forgive them. I was 39. That's how controlling this woman tried to be. However, I just kept my nose down, packed all my things, moved absolutely everything I owned by myself and took off in a U-Haul. Not even a month later after my grandmother had passed. I did try harder in an effort to keep a relationship with my mother. I should have known better but I told myself one more time, if she can't play nice, then I'm going to cut this out of my life for good. It didn't take but 5 months for me to be completely done. Since moving, my aunt made a group chat for us and my mother mostly to keep up with our day-to-day lives, funny memes, just checking up on me and just wanting to know how my new home was. My mother would always say condescending things about my new place, but I would let it slide and remind her that I would have been more than happy to live in her home had she not tried to pull what she pulled. That only made her say that I was ungrateful for her not having charged me rent for the years that I lived there taking care of her mother and working full-time. Keep in mind, my mother remarried a doctor and took every penny of inheritance my grandfather left me. To say she's rather well off is no exaggeration. She's just that greedy. But back to my story. 5 months in, my mother starts texting the group chat that I took off with items of hers from the house. Upon asking what it was I supposedly took, she launched into a tirade of me never being able to tell the truth and that she'd never forgive me for what I had done. Again, having to push for actual details was hard over a text, so I called. This is where the tea kettle finally comes into play. The call. So I called. She starts launching into me about how I gave an old cast iron tea kettle to my father, her ex-husband. I'm like, what the hell are you even talking about? She explains what she believes. That I had, while living with my grandmother or after my grandmother died, given my father an old tea kettle from our wood stove. I let her know there hadn't been a tea kettle on that stove in years and I wasn't aware it was even missing. She had somehow found out that the tea kettle was back at my father's place. Now, if you have a auntie in your life, you know how they act. Absolutely adore to twist history to their liking. This tea kettle was in my father's family for generations. I grew up knowing this. My mother simply took it with her in the divorce to hurt my father as family heirlooms meant a lot to him. So I kept explaining over and over again I had no idea what she was talking about or how Dad even got the tea kettle. After screeching at me for a while, I finally told her that I wasn't entertaining this notion of hers. I would call my father myself to figure out what had happened. She said I better get the tea kettle back or the be hell to pay. The truth. So called my good old dad. Now my father isn't perfect. He's been pretty damn good to me, especially after all that my mother put him and I through together. From using me to emotionally blackmail him and intentionally sabotaging our relationship wherever she could. AKA he knows she's a covert narcissist because he was married to her. So when I call him, he answers with, "Hi, is this about the tea kettle?" I laugh and say, "Bingo." He then explains while my grandmother was alive, she felt bad that my mother had taken the tea kettle from him during the divorce and left it at her home, my grandmother's house. After I moved back in, my father started to come visit us. He always loved my nanny and she adored him as a son-in-law. They reconnected and he helped us a lot while she was still alive. He'd even visit when I wasn't at home sometimes. He said he noticed the tea kettle but never said anything about it to her until she brought it up one day. She told him to please take it back. She knew it was his and she didn't think my mom even remembered having took it, as she took almost everything from his house when they divorced. He was very grateful, of course, and took back the family tea kettle. Fast forward 2 years later when my father was talking to a buddy about their divorces and he was admitting that he finally got something back from her even if it took almost 20 years. They had a laugh, but the friend's now ex-girlfriend was charmed by my mother and told her about the tea kettle being with my father. Boom. She called him and started calling him a thief and that he knew that tea kettle was her family's and had never been his. He just called her on her and said, "Well hell, even if it didn't say my family name on it, possession is 9/10 of the law blah blah," and on no uncertain terms let her know that she would not be getting it back as it was his in the first place. She was livid and of course he was amused. As she asked how the hell he got it in the first place, he explained my grandmother having gave it to him. But for some reason she fixated on it being my fault. I had to have been the one to give it back to him. I was the one who gave her family's tea kettle to her ex. Tiring story, isn't it? No, unnecessary and draining. Thinking that was when I realized I was done. The emancipation. So having got the full story from my father, I was texting to my aunt and mother in our group chat and telling them. My mother continued to call me a dirty liar and nasty comments in the group chat in front of my aunt. Now I am the most patient and understanding person. So while I really hate how my mother treated me, I would never call her out in front of anyone. I would always argue and debate behind closed doors and alone, as I didn't want to #1 bring anyone else into the mess that was her abuse, and #2. She was still my mother and I didn't want to embarrass her in front of anyone. I don't know what it was about this tea kettle that finally broke me, but it was the catalyst. But there were other things that made the tea kettle incident explode. While I had moved, my mother was still intent on having me move back into her home so I could take care of it until I inherit it from her one day. Yeah right. So I tested her on this a few weeks before the tea kettle incident. If I wanted to move back, her conditions were that I would only have access to 1 bedroom. There's 3, but she and her husband are hoarders BTW. His touch in this was allowing me to have access to the communal areas of the house. Isn't that so kind? To allow me 1 bathroom and access to the kitchen and living room. They're a match made in hell. The reason I'd only have access to 1 bedroom was they miraculously put their home on the market and it was going to be sold. They were going to move from a 3-story mansion to a 3-bedroom cabin. So that's the reason she couldn't put the house in my name right away. It'd have to wait until they bought a new house. They would live in the cabin with me while the new home was being built and their old home sold. It's beyond insane, but this is how her mind works. I then told her no thanks. I'm very happy spending way more money being in a thriving city and having my own home with 3 bedrooms. However, it struck me my mother likes to lie a lot. So much so that over the course of years I was doing the hands-off approach. I would record what she'd say and replay it to myself to remind me that I wasn't insane. Because as I'm sure many of you know, gaslighting is a hell of a drug. This house lie was another provable story. There would be evidence if it was on the market. One of my buddies who grew up with me as a real estate agent. He hates my mother because of how my mother treated his mom. So he gladly helped me look at all the listings from as far back as a year ago. Supposedly she had put her house up for sale about a month ago. He couldn't find anything about it. It's listed as not for sale anywhere even as of today's writing. So boom, more concrete evidence of her lying. I had recorded the conversation with her and her husband without her knowing it. Don't worry, I live in a one-party state because again nothing comes without terms and conditions and she likes to rewrite history. Back to the Future. I had recorded this conversation. I thought it's about time that I do something different. If I'm thinking about going no contact, I might as well go out in a blazing ball of righteous hellfire, right? While she was attempting to humiliate me in front of my aunt again, I spoke to my aunt in a separate message. I'm sorry if you are going to be upset with me, but this has been 41 years in the making and I'm done. She called me worried and I told her the truth finally. I let someone else hear the lies she told me. And in the group text, I posted the real estate listings and how their home was not listed for sale anywhere. My mother started to go into panic mode and was telling more lies about how it's not up yet because it was so new. I let her know that was a lie too, as it had been quite some time since she said she listed it. My aunt gasped seeing her floundering for an explanation in the chat. I explained and she let me know no matter what she'd still love me, and understood how after years of abuse I had finally had enough. The fallout. So as a narc usually does, she went on her rampage and started to blacken my name to everyone in our family and in our hometown. Not a big deal. I don't really like my hometown. The few people I keep up with are lifelong pals. They know the private monster my mother can be versus the public persona most people get. But for years it had been building. I had a lot of proof. However, I was trying to allow her to behave and back off. I had not answered her since the night I posted those listings to my aunt's group chat. But I was getting nasty messages from the flying monkeys about what a terrible daughter I am. I finally texted and let her know unless she backed down and stopped this campaign against me, I was going to do something to her for how she's poisoning my name and reputation. I knew from reading about narcissists that this was coming, so I prepared. When she didn't stop and a preacher I had never spoken to contacted me via Facebook to attempt to shame me into talking to her, I saw red. I did it. I went full scorched earth. I made a huge group chat with all of my contacts in my phone. All our family, some of her friends, some of her ex-friends, her husband's family, his kids, many people in our community, the preacher who decided I was a horrible daughter. Many who believed her lies. Most of these people had turned their backs on me anyways, so I didn't feel too bad. When I sent them all the nasty things she had said about them to me in texts, voicemails and the phone recordings I had, I didn't realize how much I had saved all just to keep my own sanity with her gaslighting me. And I sent it all. At the end of it with the story about the house being for sale and the latest Lee fest she had concocted. Shown my father, who was also in the group chat, took a picture of the kettle. He asked in the chat, was this really worth it? Many of these people had also wronged him and the community due to the lies my mother spread about him after their divorce. He and I then left the group chat. The conclusion. Suffice to say that ruffled many feathers of people. Many of them were upset at how my mother had spoken about them. A lot of them blamed me for being a horrible daughter and some have apologized to me. I don't care about them. I care about the damage I finally inflicted on the woman who hurt me over and over again with no conscience. I landed a blow to the weakest part of herself, her public persona, her ego. Took that hit and now she can truly be the victim she's always claimed to be. All of this could have been avoided if she didn't lose her goddamn mind over an old rusty tea kettle that's worth nothing. Nothing but sentimental value, and not even to her. That tea kettle was just a conquest to her, a token of victory over her ex-husband. I went no contact that day. I have also cut off many of the relationships from the people in that chat even if they apologized. It's not that I don't forgive them. I just don't miss them. Maybe I'm a horrible person for doing what I did, but I can't lie and say it didn't feel good to finally show people what she's really like. I spent so much of my life trying to be the good daughter that when I finally broke, I broke hard. I hope you don't judge me too harshly for my actions, but if I had to over again, I'd pick the same every time. Edit. Thanks for making me aware of the run-on sentence. I admit I wrote this in a very emotional state and didn't edit clearly. I hope it's clear to read now. Even if it's a book. Update. I have learned it's been about a month since I posted this that my mother contacted my father and tried to play the I miss our daughter card. He informed her that I want nothing to do with her, and yes, before asked, he did have her blocked. She called from a friend's phone. She keeps blaming my wanting nothing to do with her with me being brainwashed by him and my support group. He promptly hung up, and if she calls back on different numbers he immediately hangs up. I have changed my number since the fallout so she can't contact me personally. More people reached out about a week ago, some family, to let me know they broke contact with her as well over what happened. Her credibility is shot apparently. She's miserable and everyone knows it. Honestly, I don't want updates on her. I steer conversations away when she's involved or mentioned. This is going to be my last update. I really do appreciate all the thought-provoking and encouraging comments. They made me laugh, some made me cry, but all words were appreciated. Story 2, wifey broke her silence, tried to seduce me, and is scrambling to find an apartment now. The fact that this was predicted so well by so many people here is kind of frightening, but it only seems to prove what a big stereotype wifey is. After roughly a week of the silent treatment, Wifey couldn't keep it up anymore and started love bombing. She even tried to make me dinner and get me drunk. I told her while she was cooking that I wouldn't touch anything she made. For one, she's a terrible cook, and secondly, I don't trust her not to put something in the food. She made overcooked hamburgers, and I didn't touch them or the alcohol provided. I mean, the beer was already opened. She cried and said I was being mean by not eating her food, and I coldly said it was because I can't trust her anymore. She retorted that it wasn't like she cheated on me or anything. I said back that she may as well have cheated since her mother was always more important to her than me, the man she married. You can't keep a marriage by treating your spouse as secondary. Wifey changed the subject by breaking down crying again and begged that if I stopped the divorce, we could get the marriage counseling I'd wanted, and she'd never try to have her mother live with us. I told her it was far too late. She had her chance and blew it badly. She already made it very clear where she'd always stand. In the past 2 years, she made no effort to get better and only acted nicer in public. Why would I want to stay in that sort of toxic relationship? She had to answer truthfully for once and admitted that she likely would have left me if I'd done the same stuff to her. But she still kept trying to convince me not to divorce and that we could work it out. I had to just walk away and go into the office again. Wifey didn't stop and even tried to initiate intimacy multiple times. She walked around the house in lingerie a lot and even my favorite of wearing nothing but a lacy apron. She hasn't done that for me since our honeymoon, even when I asked. She tried touching me in places, running her fingers in my hair, and getting on her knees to try to entice me. I didn't take her bait and stonewalled her. She ended up gaslighting me with the "am I not good enough?" online. I told her she used to be, but I just can't see her that way anymore. Wifey left me alone to hit the bottle hard after I said that, and she wound up puking in the kitchen. I wouldn't put it past her to try and baby trap or frame me at this point. I even lock the door when I sleep and I've installed a hidden camera in the room. I want out of this house, but I can't leave yet until I can get into my new place. Wifey's now freaking out even more because now she has to find an apartment for herself right away. I don't really care where she'll end up. I'm just happy I'll be free of this house soon. I've also made sure not to tell her where my upcoming apartment is located, and she's tried to get that info out of me 3 times already. As soon as my new apartment is ready, I'll start moving stuff in. I'll be taking the bed from the guest room when I go. I paid for it after all, and it'll be easier to move since it's a queen size, and what's in the master bedroom is a king. I'm a light sleeper, so having a comfortable bed is a must. My wife can have the bulk of the furniture. She can either leave it for the next tenant or she can sell it. I don't care anymore. The apartment I'll be moving into is a 1-bedroom. The previous tenant left it in a sorry state, so it needs some remodeling, but I picked that specific one because not only will the rent be far cheaper than the house, I'll be much closer to my job. Like, I can walk or bike to work from there, and I just might. I haven't ridden a bike in years because I never could get wifey to. Yet another thing she's held me back from, so when I move out, one of the first things I'm going to do is buy a bike. Added to clarify, wifey is the only one who's been drinking. I've avoided it for a while now. Added 2, I've gotten many comments from people judging me from this post alone. I've not been acting this way for no reason. Read my prior posts to see what I dealt with that led to this. Added 3, to explain what happened with my bike situation, wifey hates bikes. She never wanted to ride with me, and that made me slowly lose interest. Then she threw out my old bike without asking me. I wasn't very mad because it was in bad shape, but it's on me for never replacing it. I acknowledge that, still, not sure what bike I want yet, either street, MTB, classic road bike, or a fixie. Story 3, when my nasty coworker gave my cell number to my mother that I was trying to cut out of my life. I spoke before in detail about my mother, just know she's an extremely awful person. I'm glad I have nothing to do with anymore, but this is about Ted, a coworker I used to have when I was in college and working part-time in a warehouse. Unlike me, Ted was a full-time employee, but he didn't act like it. We were about the same age. Though Ted was a snoop, he loved gossip, and he loved to look for things. Ted also spent long periods in the bathroom listening to his MP3 just to avoid working. The first time he got written up was for bringing explicit material to work and reading it out in the open while on break. He called it BS and said our manager was approving, but no one else sided with him about it. The second time Ted got written up, it was because he gave my cell phone number to my mother. She called my job, pretending to be my girlfriend, and Ted gave her the number without question. How did he get it? All employees had their numbers written down by the manager. Most of the employees were part-timers like me, and employee turnover rates were high, So the manager had all our numbers written down at the ready to call someone in to take over a shift when needed, which was surprisingly often. I wouldn't call the manager an unpleasant guy, but he kept everyone at arm's length, anyway. Ted gave my mother my first cell phone number, and she immediately used it to start calling and harassing me. Oh, he got in trouble for it when I complained to the boss because it was in the rules. You're not allowed to give out any personal information of your coworkers. Ted actually blamed the write-up he got for it on me and claimed I should have warned him. I pointed out that if I had a girlfriend, then she'd already have my number, she wouldn't need to ask a stranger for it. Ted gave me attitude and stopped talking with me at all after that. Ted got fired a few months later after being caught snooping in the manager's office again, which he'd been forbidden from entering. He made a big show of yelling, "Screw you, screw this job," when he grabbed his backpack and ran out. I saw him again about a year later in the area, working for a landscaping service. I rode by on my bike and slowed down when I saw him working a lawnmower. He didn't seem to recognize me, but I recognized him.